Howdy, folks. Kevin here. Today we're going to be talking about an article titled Shift Left Testing Clarified. I actually covered an article on what is shift left testing a little while back, and this is kind of a follow-up to that, and I do believe I will have another follow-up to this because shift left testing is actually a pretty popular term these days, and so it's good to know what it's about. They start off with the headline of shift left testing is good, but implement automated testing and continuous testing first. That makes sense. And they'll cover in this article why it's important to implement those first before you even try doing shift left testing. Shift left testing has become a hot term in the software industry since 2019. SmartBear even released a product named Test Left. And the author adds their opinion that this product is a mistake, which is kind of interesting. I like when authors are opinionated. It makes for some interesting arguments. According to Wikipedia, shift left testing is an approach to software testing and system testing in which testing is performed earlier in the life cycle, i.e. moved left on the project timeline. First half of the maxim, test early and often. If my understanding of shift left testing is correct, I've been practicing it since 2008. Therefore, I'd like to share my understanding of shift left testing here. This is a weird table of contents. I think it's because the Pocket app that I use for these doesn't get the formatting right. But the funny thing is this table of contents makes it look like a very long article, but it's not that long. It's 8 minutes. Concept of shift left testing is not new. This is from a presentation in 2015 where they said test locally has been moved to the immediate next step of write code at Facebook. So this is their kind of a way that they develop code. So they write the code, then they test locally, then they diff it, and I don't know what Sandcastle is. Basically, that Facebook has been doing this for a while now. It's not specific to 2019. It's just like that's when it was, I guess, formalized. Shift left testing is really another name for test early, though the definition of shift left testing is vague, which is why we're talking about this in the article. Just like many fancy new terms such as CI/CD. CI/CD is continuous integration, continuous delivery, but the idea is like deliver to where, to production. I have seen CI/CD that goes, continuous delivery to staging, and then it sits in staging for a month. That's not quite what CI/CD means. Release, assuming to production often, but how often? Are we talking every day, every month? What level of regression testing are you doing? So the article goes on, Facebook releases twice a day, which would totally change the whole development process. I don't believe Facebook teams will waste lots of time on estimating user story points and worrying about velocity charts. I highlighted this because there's an article that the author links to, which is estimating user story points is a waste of time, and I'm going to cover that because it's not necessarily specific to front-end testing, but oh my gosh, I am so tired of wasting time on estimating stories when no one actually cares. Project managers don't actually care what estimate you give them, they just want a number. And that drives me insane. And the thing is, even if they say they care, I've never, ever had someone come up and be like, hey, your estimates, like, they're not great. I've looked at your past 3 months of your estimates and, like, can you work on them? No, because no one in my career has ever looked at estimating 2 weeks after the fact and evaluated whether it was a good estimate or not. All they care about is, did you get the work done in an appropriate amount of time? And an appropriate amount of time is like within their short-term project memory, which is about a week and a half. You take a week and a half on any task, or longer than a week and a half on any task, and they'll get upset. It doesn't matter if you estimated that, like, hey, this is going to take 3 weeks. They'll get upset. Sorry. I'm going to let that go, but I will be back on that topic later. The reason I know that all my software is that all my software is released on a daily basis too. When I work on software development, I don't have a clear distinction between writing code and tests. To me, it's the yin-yang of one activity. That's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to have a developer who like sees tests and development as the same exact thing. Hopefully you can't hear my son playing piano in the background. But if you can, that's some nice background music, and hopefully I don't get a copyright strike because of it. We'll see. On my computer screen, a programming IDE was on the left and TestWise is on the right. TestWise is that software that they wrote, which is an IDE. So they have a programming IDE and then a testing IDE. That's kind of interesting. A user story was only considered done when it passed the automated end-to-end tests, which were newly created. This is quite rare to see that a user story is considered done when it passes end-to-end tests. I don't see that a lot. So that's was worth highlighting in my opinion. Oh, in the author's opinion, test automation should be discussed within the capability of production release. That sentence doesn't make sense. In my opinion, test automation should also be discussed with the capability of production release. Without that context, it will be talking only. Okay. Let me try to decipher that. Basically, make sure your test automation relates to production releases. Otherwise, your test automation isn't good for anything. I think that's what's being said. I didn't quite get that sentence or paragraph. Benefits of shift-left testing. You've probably seen a long list of benefits of shift-left testing elsewhere. Here I will just emphasize one. Earlier a defect is found, the cheaper it is to fix it. Actually, this is one of the few things I still remember from my software engineering course at uni. In my view, this is a good enough reason for projects to adopt shift-left testing. So there you have it. Like, you only need that one single reason to implement shift-left testing. That's enough. That's pretty cool. And I think that's pretty good. Pretty good reason, and it will save you a lot. So there you go. What kind of testing do we do in shift-left testing? Answer is automated end-to-end or UI functional testing. And it must be, the author says it must be end-to-end functional testing. Term shift-left indicates moving the testing activities that were previously done on the right, i.e. the end of the development cycle. This means functional testing that was performed by testers. Unit testing is not included in shift-left testing because, according to test-driven development, unit testing should have already been on the left. You don't need to shift it left at all. It should have already been there. Somebody asked about API testing, and his answer is it depends, but mostly it is not. If your final testing phase includes API testing, then you may improve it by shifting it to the left. In my experience, API testing is commonly conducted solely by developers. Regardless, if your app has UI, focus on UI functional tests first. Non-functional testing, such as performance and load testing, generally does not fit in shift-left testing. Basically because you need special and controlled environments, and you could shift it left, but there's no point to shift non-functional testing if functional testing was not done first. That's fair. Don't do performance testing on code that may not stay the same because it may be broken. For end-to-end test here, what I mean is a user story level test via UI. So basically browser testing. Shift-left testing must be test automation. Definition of shift-left testing is vague on whether the tests are executed manually or automated. In the author's opinion, shift-left testing only makes sense if it's done via automation. Some might argue I can move manual testing left. No, you cannot. At least you won't do it in practical, repeatable process. Don't forget that according to the definition, shift-left testing is the first half of test early, test often. How can you test often with manual testing? And the point is that manual testing takes a lot of work. And so how are you going to do a lot of work often? You're not. It's going to be too difficult. Here's an example. For an insurance app, lodging one claim might take 5 to 10 minutes by an experienced manual tester without making a single mistake. Therefore, testing often is not possible with manual regression testing. And that's for a single test of lodging a claim, which might be more than a single test. Test automation is fundamental agile practice, the enabler. Okay. Who conducts shift-left testing? Programmers and manual automated testers or business analysts. The role of programmers in shift-left testing is obvious. As there's no heavyweight design stage in agile projects, programming activity is the leftmost activity that involves a visible user story implementation. In other words, shift-left testing moves left to get programmers involved. That's great. Get programmers involved in testing. If the programmers are not involved in testing, testing will fail. That's my very, very strong opinion, that you might have testing work slowly, maybe trudge along, but it's never going to be what it needs to be to be real good automated testing unless you have programmers involved, because programmers are changing the code daily. They need to know what impacts they're having and how they can help mitigate those impacts. They don't have to be full testers themselves, but they gotta know what's going on when they change code. Otherwise, they change code and testers are left scrambling, constantly scrambling, trying to catch up. And management comes in and they go, why do we still have bugs if we have QA? What is QA doing? Why is QA not writing new tests? Why are they always maintaining these old ones and never getting new tests out there? And the answer is because the programmers keep breaking things. Flashbacks to bad times. Since I have been practicing shift-left testing since 2008 in group or solo projects, I believe a programmer can do both development and testing if she has a testing mindset / skills. I'll write don't care about the separate article. How left exactly is shift-left testing? You might have heard of acceptance test-driven development before. In theory, testers can design or even write test scripts before a user story is implemented. However, in reality, it makes sense that real testing starts with the first draft implementation that has been deployed on the dev/test server. And yeah, I think writing test scripts before a user story is implemented, I don't really like that. Test scripts are going to be so specific that you're going to start writing them and then the user story is going to change. The user stories change so much in my experience that, you don't really want to be spending time writing any level of code. Like, you can write outlines, you can write your user stories, but I wouldn't really write code until that user story is ready. Like, this is what the developer is working on. This is what we're implementing. And even then, you don't need to worry about writing. Like, don't spend too much time on making the code perfect, because the programmer can discover something about this user story that's just not technically possible or needs to be changed. So keep that in mind. How to succeed in shift-left testing. Solid test automation and continuous testing process. Shift-left testing requires a high level of test automation. You simply cannot do shift-left testing well by executing tests manually based on a spreadsheet. Testing is about feedback. Test early, test often means much quicker and more often feedback. Manual testing is simply unable to meet the criteria. Therefore, there was good reason that testing activities were put at the end of waterfall projects. Basically, manual testing was put at the end of waterfall projects because manual testing is slow and requires a lot of work, and so you don't want to do it all the time. Automated testing, on the other hand, in theory is not slow, and in theory does not require a lot of time, but I've had issues with that being the truth. How will a tester demonstrate a defect to a programmer? Remember, we are in shift-left testing mode. Programmers are supposed to react quickly based on the early feedback. It's common that a manual tester could not describe the defect correctly or replicate it reliably. I don't know why I didn't highlight this, because this is quite true. I can't highlight on here? When this happens, it is a waste of programmers' time. Therefore, test automation is a must. Besides working on test automation for the user story, the team must have solid continuous testing process to run an automated regression testing suite. As we know, the byproducts of a programmer's code check-in are regression defects. Kind of an interesting thing to mention, that when programmers check code in, regression defects happen. Hopefully not all the time, but they happen. So you have to have this continuous testing process and assume that the code broke something. That way, don't assume that the code didn't break anything. Assume it's broken, go from there. Some readers might wonder, but we don't have the skills in test automation nor continuous testing. The answer is learn them. Pretty blunt, but makes sense. This is not about shift-left testing. In my opinion, every software engineer needs to master basic test automation. Otherwise, they will not be qualified for being an engineer. By the same token, if a team does not have a continuous process to run a comprehensive automated regression suite, the team is not qualified to use Agile or DevOps. I don't know why I didn't highlight this, because this is right on. If you don't have a continuous process in place to run your tests, you're not doing automated testing. Because I've I was running into this where we had automated tests and they weren't they were being run half the time. The half the time that they were being run, there were errors, there was flakiness with it, and so they just got ignored. And so that continuous process, that discipline wasn't there, and it meant that the tests were ignored. And when the tests are ignored, you're not really agile, because you're breaking things and having to, not knowing it, and then having to scramble to fix them. And that's not very agile. Automated test script is easy to read. In shift-left testing, there will be a lot of communication over test scripts between the programmers and other team members. It is important that the automated test scripts are easy to read for all. My recommendation is raw Selenium WebDriver plus RSpec. And they go into some common mistakes of using Gherkin or Cucumber. Gherkin syntax is easy to read, however, it comes at a huge cost, test maintenance. I generally agree with this. I don't really like writing Cucumber code. I don't like Gherkin. I think it's a really neat idea for very specific instances where it's specifically beneficial to the team, but I think in a large majority of cases, it's not as beneficial. As the cost benefit isn't there. It costs too much for the little benefit it has. Test scripts are in a compiled language such as so this is a mistake, is that test scripts are in a compiled language such as Java or C#. Test scripts need to be written in a scripting language. On that note, a mistake that test scripts are in JavaScript. And I got to chuckle at this one. We will cover this, why JavaScript is not a suitable language for real web test automation. I'm going to cover this in a upcoming article review, because I thought they made some interesting points, and I like a little bit of controversy. It's fun. And what a great title. I mean, talk about just like, stirring up some anger and animosity. Yeah, we'll cover that later. I think it was a decent argument, and so I'm still going to write my test in JavaScript. Testing tool is easy to use. With a hype term in the software industry, there will be a flood of tools for it. There's no exception for shift-left testing, such as SmartBear's Test Left and Micro Focus's UFT Developer. However, these tools are wrong. First of all, I've never seen one single successful test automation attempt with this kind of commercial tool with proprietary syntax and offering wrong practices of record and playback, object identify, GUI utility, data-driven testing. Oh, that's interesting. I'll read that later. As a matter of fact, the test automation trend is moving towards free and open source test frameworks. The popularity of Selenium WebDriver is proof. Their recommendation is TestWise. Disclaimer, they created it. But, I don't know. They wrote this article. They're allowed to plug their product. I'm going to plug my product at the end of this video. You may download and use fully functional TestWise in a free mode, blah, blah, blah. Of course, with the test automation framework in plain text, such as Selenium WebDriver, you have the freedom to choose any testing IDE or programmer's editor. However, please note that the choice shall be based on the preferences of the team members with the least technique skills. Oh, that's kind of interesting. I don't know if that's like a recommendation or just a statement. Oh, look, I can highlight again. Relying on solid continuous testing. If shift left testing is test early, then test often is continuous testing. By shifting testing left, programmers tend to make more code changes, which will inevitably lead to more regression errors. I'm trying to think why shifting testing left makes programmers make more code changes. I guess because they're more confident, and so they're more able to develop more rapidly. And if the more code changes you make, the more regression errors you're going to have. That's fair. Blaming a programmer is not fair, as the errors are due to the nature of software development. One code change might impact other parts of the software, but automated regression testing will provide the safety net. That's good. I don't think you should ever feel bad for breaking code that's in development. Like, that's what you do. You break code. This is why we're not doctors. This is why we're not surgeons. because we break the code too much. At least that's why I'm not a surgeon. I would not be very successful. Do I cut here? I don't know. Do I cut here? Let's give it a shot. Oh, I shouldn't have cut that artery. That's how I would be as a surgeon. And that's why I do development and not medical things. So that's the end of the article. Yeah, it was kind of interesting. Just kind of covered different thoughts on shift left testing and clarified a few points. Hopefully it clarified a few points. What do you think? I'd love to hear your opinion on this, and maybe I'll go into data-driven testing clarified in a future one. I'm definitely going to cover that one about why JavaScript is not a good language for testing, because I thought that was really interesting. But anyway, until next time, have fun testing.